Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar with the National Complete Streets Coalition. Today we will be talking about equitable complete streets principles in school communities. We'll start with hearing from Nelson Nygaard. We'll then move on to hearing from Discover Traffic Gardens, and finally from Safe Routes to School Los Angeles. We will end today's webinar with a Q&A portion. As we move throughout the webinar, please go ahead and ask your questions put your questions in the chat box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. I'd now like to introduce Drew, who will be kicking off today's webinar. Drew has more than 20 years of academic, public sector, and consulting experience in transportation planning and operations. Under her leadership, since 2014, Nelson Nygaard has expanded its offerings into active transportation and safety, focusing on citywide and campus planning, street design, safe routes to school, and vulnerable road user safety. She uses her multidisciplinary skills to focus on helping communities elevate walking, bicycling, and transit to normal and viable transportation options for all people aged 1 to 100. Drew believes that the purpose of streets is not only to get us where we want to go, but also to enjoy where we are. Related to this webinar, Drew has been active in developing Safe Routes to School programs across the country since 2001 and has supported LADOT's Safe Routes to School program since 2013. Drew, welcome, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, May. Nelson Nygaard is pleased to curate this conversation about using equitable complete streets principles for engagement and design in school communities. In the business of Safe Routes to School, our practice incorporates experts in our engineering and design, visual communication, and active transportation and safety sectors to develop projects and programs that help school communities across the country shift toward a traffic safety culture. We are pleased to work with the National Complete Streets Coalition, Fionnuala Quinn from Discover Traffic Gardens, and Margot Ocañas from Safe Routes to School Los Angeles to think about how equity informs our work, from selecting schools through informing designs and programming. We believe that student and school community engagement in complete streets provides access to information and leadership that can help eliminate health and wealth disparities in all the places we work. Our first presenter is Fionnuala Quinn from Discover Traffic Gardens. Fionnuala is the founder of Discover Traffic Gardens. Her first love is watching children experience the type of active learning fun that creates new awareness about our built world. Raised in another time and place, Fionnuala brings a fresh perspective to how things could be to her everyday work and ideas. With decades of experience as a civil engineer, plus as an advocate for better streets, Fionnuala now designs custom traffic gardens, educator kits, and related hands-on activities. Fionnuala, on to you.
Thank you, Drew. Good afternoon, everybody. So I was a kid who, from a very early age, had independence using the streets. I came to the U.S. as an adult from a place where families were huge, women couldn't drive, so us kids had to get ourselves around. I was riding public buses home from the city center from the time I started school. And that was normal, and I had all sorts of adventures. And we seem to have forgotten that kids have the ability to navigate the built world, and we don't seem to value the importance of the knowledge and spatial skills that this developed. I am concerned that they are not getting enough of the replacement opportunities to develop those understandings in our current scheme of things, and this is crucial knowledge. Today I'm going to describe 3 projects that demonstrate ways I've been reinviting children into the complete streets conversation and letting them know that streets are designed for them and that they have a role in figuring out how they should work for everyone. So I happened upon this no kids on sidewalk sign at a shopping center, but that sentiment is not a million miles away from how things seem to work on our public streets. So many of them are uncomfortable and hostile places, and in many cases children don't seem welcome. How can kids get themselves anywhere independently if they can't cross a street? How can we have equitable complete streets if we're not designing them for children? How can we expect a future if we are not educating children to see that built world? There is a new guidance manual about to be published, Designing Streets for Kids, You can look up Island Press to make your advance order. Our streets can be fixed, and I want to recruit that next generation of children to keep up that work. We need them on board with these ideas, and everything about how the built world is designed and operates makes for great learning lessons for them. So in building serious engagement with children, there need to be basic ideas that run under any activity and that are spelled out at every opportunity. The most fundamental principle is putting people first. Everything we build is serving people, including comfort, safety, access, age, ability, and background. And it's easy to frame these activities around real characters with name and drama. Jorge just broke their leg and now they have to cross the street. Works better than how do we design a safer intersection. So engagement is built by pulling back the curtain and treating them as future grown-ups. I've had great fun taking a bunch of girls down to the signal control box at the intersection close to their school and having the state traffic engineer open it up so they can learn about the goings-on inside. We want them to understand that design is related to safety, that the designed world is something that can be fixed and that can be changed to make things better, that safety is not just a set of rules, but it is directly related to the designed world and things working better. And this leads them to Vision Zero ideas. And it's easy to get kids to agree that nobody should get hurt trying to get home or to school. And now how do we go about fixing that? Explaining about public space goes hand in hand with encouraging them to speak up and engage. So I'm going to talk about 3 projects. They're all from the DC region where I'm based, and they were for different communities and settings. When and where I can, I work with kids where traditionally notions about involving them might be overlooked. In my own life, I still get in situations where my mother will say things to me afterwards like, why are you talking to these important people? Well, I have had many great moments where I have led kids down a path where they've ended up speaking to or submitting their ideas to important people. And of course, I'm really teaching them their entitlement to engage and that we are all important people. In the case of 2 of these projects, the children's input went on to influence the actual finalized facility, and in the other case, the children's actions influenced those who had power to cause things to happen. So this was a project conducted with the Complete Streets Department of the City of Alexandria. It's a very old city, so it has many narrow streets, but this was in a traditional 20th century neighborhood. The project was small, but it was just a wonderful, positive project from start to end. The location was fantastic as it's next to a playground and on a walking and biking trail. The idea was to take an old, underutilized asphalt pad and transform it into a traffic garden or set of streets for kids to play actively on, and also to act as a new community tool for bike rodeos and things like that. So fundamental to the project was the idea that the local children would be invited to a public input session and be part of the design process. We held that event at a community library. It was advertised. Some families came specially, but it also just drew the kids who were at the library that Saturday. We were in a community room next to the kids section. The kids were put through a quick education process so they had an idea of what was going on. In the left photo, that attendee is already at work. He's been given a design sheet and streets and glue sticks. He has photos for reference, and you can spot city officials around him doing some explaining. At the start of any event, I always hold a session for all the adults present to talk about working with children and how they are different. On the right, you can see the same child a short while later. He's now wearing a vest and a hard hat, as he has already been to the Department of Public Works, and he's received an approval stamp for his design. That's his building permit resting on the table, and he's been given the go-ahead to lay out his design on the model. He's engaged in a communication process with the Department of Public Works that likely asked him to add more features, and now he has built his model going from 2D to 3D, which is a real learning challenge. So I sometimes detect skepticism at the notion that we're really using kids' ideas, but it's true. In the case of traffic gardens, these are pretty straightforward concepts that kids can wrap their minds around, and they have fresh ideas, and we can take the best of them. On the right, you can see where we had a work session where city officials were considering the children's submissions, and then we came up with the final design concept. That design ended up being a merging of 3 of the submissions. The kids had mailed in their drawings at City Hall, and we had given them some Vision Zero loot when they handed them over, sort of as an acknowledgement that they had contributed. It's always important to remember their kids, so they're also given the option of keeping their designs. Everyone is sent off with blanks and told to keep designing, because I have limited time with children and try and make sure they keep up the work of thinking about how the world is designed even after they leave. So here is one of those young designers whose submission formed the basis of the final layout. She's 8 years old at the time. First picture, she's explaining her design idea to the city engineer who's sitting in the Public Works Department. We had informed her afterwards of the outcome, so she knew her design was being used. The second picture shows where she stopped by the site on her way to school when we were working out there. And in the last picture, she's in the middle of a shot with her pals using the facility. Of course, this is not true design, but we did change how the space is used and use the language of design. And I do think how much 8-year-old me would have loved going through this entire experience. So this is BREA Transportation Summer Camp. It's another comprehensive child engagement experience. BREA is a unique kind of special place. It's a public charter preschool that serves immigrant families in DC through a 2-generation approach. For 4 summers, I ran a transportation-themed camp for the older siblings of the parents who were attending parent college on site. These were mostly kids who would not have had much by way of other summer options. And each year we spent 3 weeks doing some sort of big building project with the parents close by. So we would spend our time learning about the facets of the design and going on field trips and asking experts for input and advice. And having a free hand allows the ability to create activities around all the key roadway issues. Here the children are doing a challenge about getting their kids to school. Some had a grid layout and some had a cul-de-sac layout. And within a short time, the kids with the cul-de-sac were saying, this isn't fair. It's a much longer trip for us to get to the school. And that is what I call a force. The kids had figured out the fundamental land use problem. So we work on all different levels, and as well as learning, we keep them busy, cutting, building, hauling. This really works in the learning process. The first year we built a box city, so they were looking at how to put together a community. The next year we built a full-scale complete street where they had to compete and win the parts to make it work better. The third year we built the secret traffic garden where we transformed a courtyard, and the fourth year we built a secret pop-up park where they transformed another courtyard. We use the word secret a lot as we were very big in keeping everything under wraps and having big surprise ribbon cuttings and unveilings and inviting everybody along. In fact, one of those projects, the secret traffic garden ribbon cutting, became part of what helped form the team for the DC projects that I'm going to talk about next. It's very important having children show off to adults and displaying their ideas. And after this demonstration, a team formed to find funding to build real traffic gardens in the city. This acted as proof of concept to folks from local design firms and others. Most importantly also, we have the parents involved in these great events, seeing their children playing these big roles, explaining the designs and the process, and talking about the future. So this is the DC project that I referenced. We were tasked with building traffic gardens at 2 schools and had many stakeholders, but a key group were the students at both schools. It was their playgrounds that were being transformed, and they would be the users, so it was also a great project to involve them in. We wanted the kids to see the street and transportation connections between their world of school and home and the adult world of City Hall and the designers, and channel all that into a design for their playground. They wrote letters to the mayor, and they dressed up and they role played. The design charrettes that we held at each school were different. One was an in-depth set of rotating lessons for the second grade class, while the other was more a fun fair for 180 attendees. And this came out of direct planning with each school, hence the events look different. But these became incredibly important events in the language of the project. The team would be like, remember the kid who said this, or the PE teacher who pointed out that. So this helped us form our design ideas. I seem to have gotten behind in my slides. Similar to the Alexandria project, we held a team workshop where we laid out all the kids' ideas and came up with the final drawings, and there was a lot of work in between, getting from the drawings to the day where we cut the ribbon. But this is the real part, where children actually see their ideas going into the real world. So both of those traffic gardens are in use. George Mason University has been conducting research because that's what we really wanted to know, is how these facilities help children's learning. However, when I look at those painted lines, I see the work of an enormous number of children's voices. So changing fundamental beliefs about our streets can be viewed as a big lift, but the secret is kids. Kids are great. They're open to new ideas, and in developing their own ideas, their own opinions, and our job is to introduce them to the ideas, and this happens to be the approach that I have developed. The built world where they live is a tool to create activities that involve them and that are new forms of learning where their ideas are encouraged. My final word on children is that we should not underestimate their interest or abilities around these topics. They relate and are rather thrilled to be involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fionnuala. Fabulous. We'll be taking questions after both of the presentations. So at this point, I'm going to move us forward and introduce Margot Ocañas. Margot is the Safe Routes to School Director for Safe Routes to School Los Angeles. She was Los Angeles' first pedestrian coordinator and a 7-year veteran of the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. During her tenure, she installed the city's first pedestrian plaza, launched the LA DOT's People Street Placemaking Program, managed the Complete Streets redesign of Broadway, launched Vision Zero, and now manages the city's Safe Routes to School program. Margot, on to you.
Good morning. Thank you, and it is a pleasure and an honor to join you this morning. As Director of Safe Routes, which launched in 2014, I've really come to appreciate the importance of inclusiveness in our approach to equitable complete streets projects and safety education. As a program in the Department of Transportation, our work is largely infrastructure planning and implementation, but also as a public entity in a very large, complex city. We serve an expansive roster of stakeholders with very diverse interests, concerns, and biases. So this morning I wanted to share several strategies that I believe have really been instrumental in shoring up consensus and acceptance, particularly for some of our innovative efforts. As a context, our program serves one public school district, the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is the second largest in the nation, and of which 80% of those schools are within our city limits. With a universe of over 830 schools, we really realized we needed a school ranking to help direct our finite resources to those communities with most need. So using crash data, free and reduced price meal prevalence, and pedestrian propensity as those indicators in our methodology, those schools largely in the disadvantaged communities rose to the top. Importantly, these schools were not evenly distributed across our 15 council districts. And for our electeds that had been seasoned to rather expect equal attention, this school ranking was really a first for the city. And since its adoption in 2014 and subsequently refreshed in 2018, this prioritization has provided a controversial-free work plan for our program, informing where we plan, we implement, apply for funds, and construct. And because equity has been built into this ranking methodology, we have competed successfully for both construction and education funds totaling over $50 million in about 5 years. This data-driven approach also laid the groundwork for ranking our streets citywide via our Vision Zero High Injury Network. And similar to the Safe Routes exercise, we see a prevalence of our HIN streets in our most disadvantaged communities. Now, our school ranking approach actually was further validated by this HIN analysis when we saw that the top 50 schools were either on or within a quarter mile of the HIN. And in the past 30 months, we've applied a really robust 5 E's program at those top 50 schools. And recognizing how data had been so helpful in building consensus among our elected and citywide stakeholders, we really sought to formalize a data approach at the local school level, which was through a travel tally program. Many of you may be familiar with the National Safe Routes to School Travel Tally. We didn't actually tweak its structure so much, but we engaged our key school district partners in a new process. So today we host an annual Travel Tally Week in September, the month before Walk to School Day. Our district operations promote it. District mail delivers the packages to the schools. Our classroom teachers actually administer the tally and support a really robust conversation about travel on our city streets. And then our program prepares the customized reports. Now, as a city with a car culture reputation, it's really clear that 40% or more of students at nearly all of our top 100 schools actually walk. And this data has really been helpful in garnering the support as well as building momentum for those more innovative complete streets elements in our what we call our safety treatment plans. Now that we have identified those areas or school communities of most need, it was important that our 5 E's approach, 1, really respect the specifics of each community, and 2, actually build out to improvements. Truthfully, many of these communities have been through multiple planning exercises, which have not always resulted in true change to the streets. In addition, in the spirit of inclusiveness, while it's been important to work at the local level, it was also an opportunity to meet broader city outcomes, specifically our Mobility Plan 2035. And in planning our work with the school communities, we also identified and recommended treatments on segments of our future bicycle and transit enhanced network within each of those school areas, with our goal of clearly improving the safety for the routes to school, as well as actualizing some of our city's long-range active transportation and transit objectives. Another means of building project acceptance has been to expand that diversity of stakeholders when we meet with the school community. So expanding from parents and staff to neighborhood prosecutors and engineers, because each of these bring their own perspective to a planning process. And because the community has safety concerns that our program in the Department of Transportation can't control, it was really key that our other partners from enforcement and the district and the elected offices be participants in these safety assessments. Many times the community could spotlight personal safety issues, homelessness, or even gang activity that are also factors that impact their safe travel to school, and these partners were in place to be able to address those issues. And in addition to the safety assessments, we also included this roster of partners in our plan reviews. Now, our walk audits and subsequent workshops are heavily promoted by the district and the school administration. They are well attended, and we worked really hard to get people involved with having groups come forward to present their plans and encourage dialogue as each presenter brought forth their recommendations. This also was a unique opportunity to help build bridges with the school community members and other city partners, many who they just haven't had the opportunity to interface with. And likewise, these forums helped our own Safe Routes to School team established relationships with partners who, quite honestly, we are now calling on regularly for assistance. So here is an example of what we call a Safe Routes to School plan, or a safety treatment plan. And through leveraging this grassroots planning process, a diverse stakeholder involvement, the mode share analysis, and the broad city goals, because we've sort of touched on all of those, those have really given us the cover to push for more innovative and complete streets recommendations. Some of our plans now include raised crosswalks, roundabouts, raised intersections, one-way street conversions, and others that perhaps several years ago may not have actually been feasible to recommend. But as we know, planning to build out can take many years, so it's been really important to nurture a culture that prioritizes safety. So concurrently, we curated a menu of both top-down and bottoms-up programs. At the district level, we're moving towards institutionalizing Walk to School Day, monthly safety campaigns, the Travel Tally program, and working towards a safety patrol program. While at each of the top 50 schools, and potentially the 51 through 100, we are making sure that we give our students hands-on bicycle and skills training, and we have that vendor actually ensure that we touch every student in that program or at that school. Now, as I mentioned, it can take 3 to 5 years to actually move from planning to construction. So we are really committed to staying engaged with the schools. Obviously, we crack open the conversation during the school assessments, but we want to give them the confidence that there is momentum. And pop-up events have really served to continue that conversation with the community, but similarly really help to shift the culture within our own engineering departments, bolster new approaches to evaluation, and be canvases where safety education is happening in time. Our first pop-up, Little Street, is the school entrance block for Esperanza Elementary. Not unlike many schools, the school area becomes congested with double and triple parking, speeding, and non-compliant and hazardous street crossing. So with over 80% of this school's population walking, it was really critical to calm and organize the vehicle operations, increase the visibility of walkers, and also provide a gathering space because the sidewalks at the school are actually quite small and cramped. So we changed a two-way street to one-way, installed a median with adjacent parking, and supported a dedicated AM and PM valet lane. We also included curb extensions, a new traffic signal to manage the flow through the one-way street, and a pedestrian-activated signal across a key boulevard. And this pilot was up for 24 hours. We brought our engineers out, and not only was it the city's first pop-up event, but the following day, the council member for this area approved $1 million to actually have it built out permanently. Our second pop-up was, in fact, in front of Leo Politi Elementary School. Again, a first for the city, where we shut off a signal and replaced it with a roundabout. This street is actually, the east-west street there is actually quite large for being a neighborhood street. And with this intersection being 1 block east of a very large arterial, which has generally been, which has experienced speeding and Waze has generally directed people down this street, it was really important for us to change the tenor of the street and really force some slowing of the traffic. So for this pop-up, we bagged a signal and built up a roundabout. And it was interesting because generally our engineers do rank signals as a top safety improvement. It just that that signal wasn't really facilitating the calm that we needed. We hosted this pop-up on Walk to School Day to really optimize the flow of pedestrians through the treatments, and invited our department engineers to, we guided them on a tour of the project area. And I'd like to share that our assistant general manager overseeing project delivery spent close to 2 hours on site. We moved hay bales, we readjusted cones, we we tweaked various elements during the pop-up so that the engineers themselves could sort of move towards alignments of a design that made them more comfortable. And we will in fact be putting this element into a forthcoming application. And lastly, we're currently in discussions with the council office to add a mobility lane to a traffic circle, which currently has stops at all of its legs leading into it. But the goal of this particular location, which is within blocks of a school, is really to focus on the pedestrian safety. So one, providing pedestrian space with seating and pedestrian amenities, but also to shorten the crossings across all of those legs to enhance the safety and the comfort for the pedestrians, in addition to a two-way non-motorized travel lane around the circle. I think the lessons learned from this pop-up are many. And lastly, I wanted to share that in front of Leo Politi, in the spirit of, again, putting treatments up before the full build-out, we established a temporary median and provided a dedicated valet lane, again, on the school entrance block in front of Leo Politi. We worked with the district's transportation committee. We moved the buses away from the front of the school, and again, host an AM and PM valet. And within the first day of launching this, there was sort of smiles everywhere. And truthfully, it took less than 6 weeks to move from design to outreach with the community to training the valet staff to installing the treatment. I think, as I mentioned, the learnings from this experience were multiple. These are great canvases for bringing so many different people together to talk, to discuss, to debate. It was really such a pleasure to see the intermingling of our kids with our engineers, so similar to Fionnuala, really bringing our city planners face-to-face with the kids who have opinions about them. These children learn to be speakers on behalf of their own concerns. They've gotten FaceTime with our leadership as well as our elected offices, which is really just very promising. I will also say that the whole process of preparing for these pop-ups really has cultivated a sense of community among both our consultants and our engineers. We have a new, very large group of young engineers who really came out for the heavy lift of installing the pop-up, pulling some all-nighters, and it developed a camaraderie and an enthusiasm for these planners who saw things come off paper and really come to life in their ability to interface with the community. So really positive interactions all around that continue to sustain themselves even after the 24 hours of the event. And lastly, evaluation, which is increasingly important for so many aspects of our work. I really commend our Nelson Nygaard, who was the lead on our education and evaluation, in developing really simplistic but powerful ways of soliciting input from the communities. And moving from pop-up to ultimate project acceptance from electeds or others, we have the data now to say and reflect sort of what the community wants and how quickly they would like it. So we recognize that these dialogues may seem simple, but when we pull all the data together, it's moving us towards construction. And I think most importantly, through these pop-up experiences, we've learned that we can empower our school community stakeholders with an understanding of sort of planning terms, who the planning and building partners are, and understanding those critical path partners and what our missions are and how they can help inform our decisions. And lastly, just wanted to share a couple of examples that ultimately at the end of the day it is about implementation, and we've been pleased that again within the past 5 years that we've been able to move from paper to roundabouts and calmer streets and other complete streets elements with the goal of reducing those fatals among our youth in the city. And my final comment really just has to do with we've learned and found that the Safe Routes to School plans, again, because their underlying focus has been the mobility plan and how we can help to build that out, that Safe Routes to School is also taking a very active part in helping to meet the goals of our Green New Deal and some of our affordable housing and sustainable community objectives. So on that note, I will turn it back to Drew.
Great, Margot. Thanks so much. Thanks both to Fionnuala and Margot for such captivating presentations and for their timeliness, which allows us to go ahead and respond to the question and answer box. There is a Q&A dialog box in the bottom left of your screens if you'd like to ask questions. May will be curating them for us to go through. The first question is for Fionnuala. What was the funding source for the traffic garden projects, and approximately how much did they cost, or what was the range of costs?
The Washington, D.C. traffic garden projects were funded through a Vision Zero grant from the Department of Transportation. It was a $150,000 grant. That was, George Mason University got, but that covers installation of the traffic garden, but also all the design work, the engagement work. We also created a curriculum for the preschoolers, so there's a lot more in there, and of course the research. Now, the traffic gardens themselves were, they cost about $40,000 to install, but that cost, there's a lot of explaining to that. That was, original bids came in much higher. The traffic garden that you saw in Alexandria, that was all done for under $10,000. But I also have to point out, in both cases, they're using existing asphalt and not doing any improvements to them. And, that's a huge part of the cost burden already taken care of.
Great points. Thank you. The next question is for Margot. The data-driven approach on allocation of funding was described as being controversial at first since some schools got more funding than others. What were the strategies used to get everyone on board with the data-driven approach? And I would add, what strategies are you continuing with to reinforce that approach?
Certainly. I would sort of restate it that the prioritization allowed us to determine the areas where we could focus on starting the planning process. The prioritization does not actually specify the allocation of funds, but rather where we were directing our time and efforts so that we could ultimately plan well, engage the community, knowing that community engagement, robust planning, and innovative treatments were some of the criteria that would allow us to be quite competitive when we ultimately went forward to prepare applications for construction funding. As I mentioned, we did our first pass of prioritization in 2014, which was sort of the biggest hurdle to get over because it really shifted the thinking in the Office of the Electeds. But we ultimately refreshed the date again in 2018 and secured adoption from Council 4 years later. So we've kept the conversation on the table with them so that they are reminded that we are really supporting or using an equity-driven approach.
Great, thank you. The next question is for both of you, but I'm going to ask Fionnuala to respond first. So the question is, what lessons can you take from conducting engagement with children to make engagement on transportation projects more fun and meaningful for people of all ages?
Well, I try and take a very fun approach to all of these. I try and boil the topics down to their essentials. You know, having worked in the transportation field myself, I can see how these are difficult topics. They often, when you start talking about changing someone's community, that can raise all sorts of issues, where I'm trying to make a very friendly approach where go to the basics with children, make it fun, make it hands-on, and build up the ideas. Have the children come to the ideas. In every case, there's adults around children. And even though I'm focused on the children, they're watching and they're listening. And I end up in conversation with adults all the time saying, I didn't know that. I didn't know I did not know roundabout was safer. They're friendly conversations. So, but just by using these sort of friendly, accessible, recyclable materials, it just allows conversations about what are actually very tricky topics.
Yeah, that's great. And Margot, is there anything that you would add from your experience about making engagement with children exciting and fun for people of all ages?
Absolutely, and I'll build off of all of Fionnuala's comments, and as I think my team can espouse or attest to, I really encourage us to apply a lot of color and fun to our pop-up events. It's sort of appealing to the kid in all of us from 8 to 88. So we had our students, for example, at the Esperanza, customize the banners that were strung along the bollards that formed the median running down the middle of the street. So there was sort of a consistent piece of material on the pop-up that spoke of the children. Similarly, I think it was really key that we distilled our evaluation tools down to things that were very simple and accessible and really promoted conversation. And we had communities gather around fish bowls or charts, et cetera. And so, again, that combination of the kids and the adults having that conversation, as well as our staff at each of those locations, really cultivated, I think, an inclusive conversation where everyone felt very engaged. And I think, again, we had A-frames at the locations of each of the treatments in Spanish and English. Again, we worked to do this in very layman's language. Those A-frames were probably not very far from some seating opportunities where, again, children and adults and our staffers all had an opportunity to mix. But we painted it with polka dots and other colors, as I mentioned earlier, really just to set the tone of we want you to be here, we want you to enjoy it, and when people are in a place of sort of more comfort and perhaps a bit of relaxation, they're more willing to talk openly about something that can generally be an intimidating or wonky topic.
Great. Margot, this one's going to be for you. Joanna Peluso recently approached her town officials about a painted intersection right out front of the elementary school. The officials said no because they were concerned about liability, for example, someone slipping. How do you all address this in Los Angeles?
Fair question. In all transparency, what we're calling our intersection mural program is still in its infancy. So to be clear, for our pop-up events, we use tempera paints on the surface, and these the Little Street, our two-way to one-way conversion, was actually only a 48-hour project, and anything that you saw painted on the street there was actually washed clean after the event, actually with the help of some local fire department individuals. But needless to say, I think we in our own program here in Los Angeles are aspiring to move towards an intramural program because, again, we feel that decorating those intramurals can be a really great gateway for bringing awareness like, hey, you've shifted into a new zone, be aware. But we are similarly still in the process of determining the appropriate materials to address some of those slip factors, et cetera.
Great. The next question is from Daniel Conversor. In Los Angeles, what streets intersection was that existing roundabout that's getting overhaul proposed?
The specific intersection is, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Was it just what was the actual location, or?
I think we could answer two questions right here. One is where was the pop-up, and that was at Westmoreland and 11th, I think. And then there was another photo around about in your presentation, which has actually been constructed. And at what location is that?
Oh, sure. So the pop-up is at Westmoreland and 11th and 2 blocks east, traveling down 11th Street, which is the street that runs in front of the school. 2 blocks down from that roundabout, we established what I'm calling this interim median, which was the bollards with the banners strung in between, and some additional striping both for a dedicated valet lane and for the purposes of narrowing the actual drive lane relative to the parking buffer. We just saw such enormous hazardous crossing behavior and U-turns in front of the school and congestion with 3 to 4 buses in addition to pick up and drop off, that it was really just such a quick turnaround solution to streamlining the operations.
Thank you. Kate O'Brien asks Fionnuala, can you talk about the partnership development process that needed to happen before the traffic garden project could begin? Questions like who did you bring to the table and how did you approach the conversation with those schools? Did you encounter any resistance to your idea, and if so, how did you navigate it? Simple questions.
I can give you the 10-year answer. No, but it's a great question because, of course, we didn't just walk in and paint lines on the playground in the school. And I see it as a 10-year process, but just as this evolution. 10 years ago, I had a letter in the Washington Post saying, why don't we have any form of education for children to learn about this stuff? So I didn't do anything out of that. But, meanwhile, the District of Columbia was changing. You're seeing things on the street. Next thing you have bike share. You're creating all these new conversations and connections within the city and new understandings. Out of that, suddenly you have the director of PE puts in a bike education, a comprehensive bike education program throughout the system for all second graders. That's about 5 years ago, which was not part of the biking conversation. It took everybody by surprise. But it came out of the changes that were happening in the city. She saw that the city was changing, and as far as she was concerned, all the children needed to be able to live a life where they could take advantage of this. At that moment, I actually went to her to say, could I write a report about that? Because I knew that story needed to be told. And then through the report writing, a strong relationship got built, and then that led to discussing ideas about, well, how do the kids get from the gym to the public street? Because part of her program was she was putting all those 7-year-olds on the public streets at the end of their PE program, so they're riding 5 to 7 miles. So meanwhile, with all the things going on in the city, lots of people were floating the idea of traffic gardens, and there had been some other efforts. But once, our team had formed, with George Mason University, which just was a group of people who've all worked together on other things and share ideas, we just looked for the opportunity. And the opportunity came out of the Department of Transportation. And, of course, that grant opportunity, they said they didn't prescribe what the money would be for. We suggested it. But, of course, everybody was already on board with those ideas. And we had that very strong relationship now already developed with the schools through the biking program. So we took Department of Transportation money straight over into the school system, and there was no resistance. It was just a long conversation and a lot of people involved, but there had been years of discussions and just positive things happening around the city that led to that moment. And then the project itself was this wonderful sort of, because we worked together for several years on it, really big reinforcement of relationships and further conversations about what we need next. So this is very much an ongoing thing. So I don't know if that explains how we got there.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a lot about timing, relationships, and investments that are related. The next question is from Mark Rao, and the question begins by stating, the examples discussed seem to be more appropriate for urban environments. What sort of recommendations would you have for a community located 1 to 2 miles away from an elementary and high school to encourage walking, biking, or other alternative forms of commuting to or from school? Specifically, any recommended outreach approach and activities? This one, either one of you could take if you can.
I hate to say it, Los Angeles is hard pressed to be rural, but I think there's transferability in the what we call the walking safety assessment approach, or even some of the travel tallies, et cetera. Let me back up. I think the travel tally process, for example, where every child is questioned about how they travel to and from school, as I mentioned before, the teachers administer, and invariably there was always great conversation that resulted about how the kids travel, why they perhaps travel those ways, some of the challenges, the pros, the cons, so that even that simple travel tally project or exercise can stimulate that conversation. Similarly, I think the safety assessment called out that we tried to bring multiple stakeholders together, and that by having them observe the environment around the school, that everyone had a different perspective, and they also recognized perhaps different parts of the solution that they could own. So whether it's rural or urban, for the school community members, the staff, the parents, the administration to understand who's in play in affecting those changes can be very helpful. We also, when we did our walking safety assessments at middle schools, we actually did them with the leadership committees at those schools, which are all the students. So instead of pulling together parents like we did at the elementary schools, we had the middle school students very much involved in almost a middle school version of what Fionnuala was talking about, where the kids were putting ideas to paper and sketching out their ideas and plans once we provided them a toolkit of the different types of treatments that were available to them.
Great. Fionnuala, is there anything you'd like to add about working in less urban environments?
Yeah, I mean, I'm based in the suburbs, and I work in all different communities just depending on what comes up. And, I mean, part of what I do is I just scan around. It depends on the situation, but if I'm given a free hand, I just scan around to see what's going on in the built environment right around the school or the facilities. There's always something, and if there isn't something, we can go critique it and say what they should do. And I did a program for a couple of years in Middleburg, Virginia, which is a small, rural, very wealthy town. But these were not wealthy children at all. These were children of local immigrants working in the area. And I found, I took a quick scan around. They had just completed a complete streets project down the center of the town. It was already done, but I thought, oh well, let's act as if it's not done, and we'll look at all the drawings and say what we would have done. And we did a whole 5-week program out of that, and invited the mayor, and we did, we went through the whole thing, had city officials talk about it. So no matter what, the children everywhere are in a built environment, and they can talk about it and talk about how it can be changed. There's always a parking lot, a road, a something that can be the basis of these ideas.
Great. I think we have time for one more, and because we've already responded to Kate's questions previously, I'll move down to the next one, which is related to your talking points, Fionnuala. Once the kids learn more about safety, they may have conversations with their parents or guardians about how the adults aren't doing the right thing. How can this be managed, and have either of you had to navigate this tricky situation? In 1 minute or 2.
I'm just going to jump in and say I have not been. Yeah, sorry.
Carry on.
Go ahead, Fionnuala.
Yeah, I really haven't been lucky enough to get that far, because there hasn't been enough continuity yet with a lot of the work I'm doing. instead, I've had a lot of very positive conversations in real time with parents and adults around children.
Sure, and Margot here. To be honest, I haven't actually observed or had to negotiate, I guess, some of the friction that they are suggesting. My aspiration is that we continue to enthuse and motivate the children to better understand circumstances that are safe versus not safe. We, through a WalkWise pledge that we partner with our LA Police Department, through the education and encouragement work that we do around Walk to School Day or our hands-on pedestrian skills and bike skills, we really enforce upon the kids in those forums that we treat them as, and through our burgeoning safety patrol program in particular, we really encourage them to think about being the leaders or ambassadors for safety within their school communities, that they really have the opportunity to influence their parents or guardians who may drive them or choose the mode that they use, but that they have the power to explain this to the people who love them and care for their safety, and perhaps, again, influence their behavior so that they are also they are appropriately safe when using our streets. So I hope that the children will raise this in conversation.
And I have to jump in because I'd be negligent to not mention that in the research that George Mason University has done on the DC traffic cardons, parents, this issue of safety and parents' perception of safety after the children have received the benefit of all the educational stuff and use of the traffic garden is embedded in that research. We're just waiting for the analysis results right now.
Great. Well, we'll all keep an eye out for that. At this point, I'd love to thank Fionnuala and Margot specifically for sharing their wisdom and expertise with us, and thank all of you for joining us during this hour, and turn the presentation back over to the National Complete Streets Coalition to wrap up.
Thank you, Drew. And thank you to everyone who not only presented on this webinar, but was able to join and hear the great things that our presenters had to say today. Per all of the webinars with the National Complete Streets Coalition, we will be posting the recording and the slides, as well as a blog post that summarizes all of the questions and the questions that we weren't able to get to today in the following weeks. We do have another webinar coming up as part of this series. It is on Thursday, February 13th at 1:30 p.m. That's Eastern Time. And it will be about protecting user data in city transportation networks. So we hope everyone will join us for that one as well. Again, thank you to our presenters and to everyone who was able to join us today. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you and goodbye.